In the 1920s and 30s, our grandparents' generation built the mighty Sydney Harbour Bridge. 40 years later, we managed to deliver on time and on budget the Snowy Mountain scheme. It remains our largest engineering project undertaken in Australia. So why are we struggling to deliver infrastructure today? Why are we bombarded by headlines telling us about congested roads and trains, delays at harbours and ports, overcrowded schools and hospitals, and the rising cost of supplying power, water and telecommunications? Infrastructure underpins everything we do in the 21st century, and the demand for it is rising rapidly, but so too seemingly are the delivery barriers. It's imperative that we identify, build and maintain our infrastructure in a manner that's effective and efficient and that supports economic growth and social well-being. But the challenge is that Australia is a vast country with a small population and an even smaller tax base. Our cities are saddled with ageing infrastructure and separated by vast distances. The Business Council of Australia puts the cost of delivering the necessary infrastructure in Australia over the next decade at something in the order of $760 billion. What do we need to do better or differently? And how do we prioritise the infrastructure projects that are most deserving of attention? And most importantly, how do we pay for them? A number of organisations have turned their minds to these questions. Infrastructure Partnership Australia, the Commonwealth Productivity Commission, the G20 Business Offshoot, all have had a go, and they've examined the infrastructure challenge, they've identified the opportunities and the issues to be addressed. The real issue is, how do we broaden the funding options available to us? Traditionally, the government has funded the infrastructure in Australia, but the dwindling pool of taxpayers and the deep public aversion to deficit has meant that government funding is less and less likely. Like it or not, governments and the public have got to look at user pays and other indirect mechanisms to fund infrastructure. Another alternative source of funding is the sale of government assets and the use of the capital from them to fund infrastructure. This is already underway, and there's numerous good examples of how government-held assets are being recycled right across the country. So as governments take a step back, how do we encourage private sector capital to step up? Nowadays, capital does not recognise borders. It's a truly global market. So how do we position ourselves for the global investment dollar? First, we need a better and national approach to focus on the projects with the greatest economic and social benefits. The Infrastructure Australia pipeline of projects is an excellent step in the right direction. It enables the private sector to invest. Second, we need a review of procurement practices and a streamlining of the processes of national tendering. Anecdotal evidence suggests that the cost of bidding on a major infrastructure project in Australia is twice that of like countries. Third, we need a completely depoliticised examination of the expansion of user charges, especially in the transport sector. Fourth, risk analysis and risk allocation needs to be examined. In many cases, there's a poor grasp of the risks assumed, and the risks are often shifted to the party least able to manage them. This only drives the public's negative perception of private investment in the involvement and the delivery of major infrastructure. And finally, we've got to review the regulatory framework that's supporting and unfortunately sometimes discouraging the funding of infrastructure investment. There's potentially $550 billion in self-managed super funds, as well as vast pools of foreign money available. This all may seem a little bit daunting, but surely nothing's too big for the nation that built the Snowy Mountain scheme.